I command you, in the name of Jesus, stand up from that wheelchair and walk. Pastor Ken's voice echoed through the crowded church. Sweat poured down his face, soaking his white shirt. His hands trembled as he gripped the empty bottle of olive oil. He had been praying for hours, but the old man in the wheelchair didn't move an inch. Pastor, please, the old man whispered weakly, his voice trembling. If I try to stand, I'll fall. I can't walk. Please help me. Pastor Ken's frustration flared. He looked at the crowd staring at him with hopeful eyes. Their silence felt heavy, almost accusing. You don't have faith. Pastor Ken barked, masking his own doubts. That's why you're not healed. Faith moves mountains. The old man's face crumbled, tears streaming down his cheeks. Ken felt his energy draining fast. He needed to do something before the crowd started doubting him. Take him away, he said, waving dismissively. I'll pray for him later. But before the ushers could help the old man, the church erupted in chaos. Pastor, please, heal my child, a woman cried, holding up her frail daughter. Pastor, over here. Help me, another voice shouted. The sick, the blind, and the crippled surged toward the altar, their voices desperate and pleading. Ken's heart raced. His hands trembled. More people flooded into the church, carrying their loved ones. What is happening? Why can't I perform miracles? Ken thought, panic washing over him. The noise grew deafening, and the crowd pressed closer. Ken's chest tightened as he looked around, his mind spinning. I need to leave. I can't let them see me fail. As he stepped back toward the door, a voice suddenly cut through the chaos. Pastor Ken. Pastor Ken. The voice called out loudly, sounding familiar. He felt a hand touch his shoulder. Just as he was about to turn and see who it was, he woke up suddenly. He sat up in his office, breathing heavily. He looked around and saw Chaik, one of the church ushers, standing beside him with a worried face. Pastor, are you okay? I woke you up because you were shaking in your sleep, Chaik said. Pastor Ken wiped his face with his hand. Thank you, Jesus. It was just a dream, he said, waving his hands, but deep inside, he felt uneasy. His dreams often came true, and this one felt like a warning. Pastor, Chaik continued, the people are still waiting at the reception to see you. There are many serious cases today. They've already paid for the cards to see you. He dipped his hand into his pocket and brought out the money. Pastor Ken froze as the dream flashed in his mind again, people crying, begging for his help, and him unable to do anything. A wave of fear gripped him. No, he said suddenly, shaking his head. No. Refund their money. I can't see anyone today. I need to go somewhere. Pastor, are you feeling okay? Chaik asked, looking at him closely. I'm fine. Pastor Ken said quickly, opening his drawer and grabbing his car keys. Just do as I said. But Pastor, these people traveled from far places. They believe in your miracles. They are here for your help. Chaik pleaded. Pastor Ken's face hardened. Are you deaf? Do what I said now, he shouted angrily. Chaik stepped back, shocked. I'm sorry, sir, he said quietly and left the office. Chaik walked to the reception, his heart heavy. The people looked so hopeful. How was he going to tell them that Pastor Ken wouldn't see them? Before he could speak, a sick woman stood up. Is Pastor Ken coming? Please, I need him to pray for me. I don't want to die, she cried. Chaik sighed. Please calm down, everyone, he said. Pastor Ken has an urgent matter to attend to. He asked me to return your money for the cards. Before he could finish, the crowd erupted. No, they shouted. We don't want the money, we want to see Pastor Ken. He's our only hope. Some began crying loudly, while others begged Chaik to call Pastor Ken back. Meanwhile, Pastor Ken sneaked out through the back door. He entered his car, a new gift from a church member, and drove off quickly. As he sped down the road, his mind raced. What kind of dream was that? Why couldn't I heal them? What happened to my power? He asked himself, fear growing in his heart. This is not just a dream, it's a warning. He pressed the accelerator harder, ignoring the danger of driving so fast. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Pastor Ken, popularly known for his prophecies and instant miracles, is the founder of Everlight Ministry, a church so famous that people travel from far and wide seeking solutions to their problems. With a reputation for miraculous powers and immense wealth, Pastor Ken is respected and adored by many. To his followers, he is a symbol of divine favor, but few know the story of his troubled journey to the pulpit. Ken was born into a devout Christian family. His father, Pastor Anderson, owned a small church that struggled to grow despite his relentless prayers and sermons. Worshippers came seeking instant miracles but often left disappointed, claiming Pastor Anderson lacked the power to change their lives. He and his wife, Mrs. Neoma, endured years of mockery from the community. The whispers were loud. How can a man of God who carries God's matter on his head remain childless? Mrs. Neoma, a strong believer and lover of God, prayed fervently for a child. She visited countless hospitals and never stopped pleading with God, promising that if he blessed her with just one child, she would dedicate the child to his service for life. After years of tears and ridicule, God finally answered their prayers. A baby boy was born, and they named him Kenneth, lovingly calling him Ken. Ken's upbringing was steeped in faith. Pastor Anderson ensured his son participated in every church program, and the young boy soon developed a passion for God. He preached to his friends, sang beautifully in the choir, and became a shining example of godliness. His parents beamed with pride, believing they had raised a child destined to walk in God's light. When Ken gained admission to study engineering, it was a joyous moment for his parents. They knelt in prayer, thanking God for blessing them with such a wonderful son. But as Ken entered his second year in school, their pride began to unravel. Ken's roommate, Samuel, whom his parents trusted as the son of a pastor, was nothing but a wolf in sheep's clothing. Under Samuel's influence, Ken fell into a life of smoking, partying, and womanizing. The once devout boy transformed into someone unrecognizable. Samuel introduced him to a world of pleasure and sin, pulling him further away from the values his parents had instilled in him. At first, Ken tried to hide his new lifestyle. But eventually, the truth came out. His parents were devastated. Mrs. Neoma cried endlessly, pleading with God to bring her son back to the light. Pastor Anderson, heartbroken, often sat in silence, wondering where they had gone wrong. Ken managed to graduate, but barely, scraping by with a pass result. His parents' hearts sank. The boy they had once dedicated to God was now a source of shame and sorrow. As Ken grew older, his rebellion only deepened. He chose the company of friends over his family, spending his nights in hotels, smoking, and indulging in fleeting pleasures with different women. Mrs. Neoma prayed relentlessly, asking God to have mercy on her only child. But as the years passed, Ken seemed to spiral further out of control, leaving his parents heartbroken and filled with sorrow. Ken had always lived life on his own terms, carefree and unapologetic. He forgot where he came from and the sacrifices his parents made to give him the best education. But everything changed one evening when his parents, overwhelmed with shame and concern, called him into the living room. "Ken, did we do something wrong by sending you to the best university?" his father asked, his voice heavy with disappointment. "What have we done to deserve this treatment from you?" His mother's voice trembled as she spoke. "Ken, please, listen to me. Do you know how much we've prayed, how much we've cried? Do you know what we've sacrificed for you to be here? Don't throw it all away. It's not too late to come back to Christ." Tears filled her eyes, and she knelt down before him, a picture of heartbreak and despair. "Please, Ken. Please, change your ways. I can't bear to see you lost." That night, Ken tossed and turned in his bed, unable to escape the sound of his mother's tears. His mind raced as he thought about his life, about how he was once the perfect son, the one everyone admired, the one they wanted their children to be like. But now, he had become someone unrecognizable. Am I really leading myself astray? He wondered, guilt creeping in. He lay awake, feeling the weight of his choices. The next morning, a soft knock on his door woke him from his restless sleep. It was his mother. She walked in, her eyes still red from the night before. Without a word, she sat beside him on the bed. "Ken, my son," she began, her voice full of emotion. "There's no sin too great for God to forgive. You are my only child. I prayed for you, and God blessed me with you. Please, come back to Him. It's not too late. She knelt before him once again, tears streaming down her face. Please, Ken. Change your life. Don't let this be the end of your story. Ken was speechless. He could feel the weight of her love and pain. Mum, he said, his voice trembling, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you like this. What do you want me to do to make you happy? His mother looked up at him, her eyes filled with hope. Give your life to Christ, Ken. Be a pastor. It was once your dream and passion, but you abandoned it. It's not too late to come back to God. Ken sighed deeply. Pastor? Mum, this is hard, but I'll think about. Later that day, Ken met up with his close friend and roommate, Samuel. He needed to clear his mind. Samuel, I'm in trouble. My parents are pressuring me to change my life. My mum even threatened to harm herself if I don't. I love her, and I don't want anything to happen to her. Samuel laughed mockingly. A pastor? What about your girlfriends, the parties, the good life? You'll miss out on everything. My dad is also on my case about becoming a pastor, but over my dead body will I leave my sweet life for that boring path? Ken laughed uneasily but didn't respond. Days turned into weeks, and Ken's attempts to find work were fruitless due to his poor academic record. Frustrated, he decided to consider his mother's plea. He confided in Samuel about his plan to become a pastor, though his initial intention was to earn a living through it. Samuel, ever the bad influence, encouraged him, saying he could secretly maintain his old lifestyle while pretending to be devoted. One evening, Ken approached his parents. Mum, Dad, I've thought about what you said. I've decided to become a pastor. Guide me on the right path. His mother cried tears of joy, thanking God. Ken began attending church again, reading his Bible, and enrolling in a pastoral training school. Over time, he felt a genuine connection to God. His initial plan to exploit the church faded, replaced by a sincere desire to serve. Months later, Ken graduated and announced his intention to open a church of his own. His parents supported him wholeheartedly, raising funds to help him rent a small space and buy a few chairs. Despite the humble beginnings, his church began to grow steadily. Ken's heartfelt preaching and inspiring story attracted members. His parents were proud of the transformation in their once wayward son. However, challenges soon emerged. Ken noticed a decline in attendance. Members stopped coming to midweek services, and his calls were often ignored. His concerns peaked when a member, Sister Amora, confronted him after a Sunday service. Pastor Ken, why don't you perform miracles or prophesy like Pastor Solution? I've been in this church for months, and my problems remain the same, she complained. Ken was taken aback. Sister Amora, what do you mean and who is Pastor Solution? He asked, confused. I've said my piece, she replied, walking away. That night, Ken couldn't sleep. He knelt beside his bed, his heart heavy. Lord, he prayed, ever since I gave my life to you, I've been faithful. Why am I losing the little flock I've gathered? Am I doing something wrong? His voice cracked with emotion as he sought answers in the silence of the night. Ken didn't realize that this was the beginning of a test of his faith, one that would challenge his resolve and redefine his journey as a pastor. Ken started preaching in different locations, such as markets, hospitals, and schools. People loved his preaching and admired his humility. When he invited them to his church, they gladly came at first. However, over time, they stopped attending when they realized there were no instant miracles or prophecies with quick solutions. Even when Ken called to persuade them to return, they gave various excuses and never came back. Week after week, the pews grew emptier, and Ken's heart grew heavier. He felt lost, unsure of what to do. One evening, as Ken left his church, he heard the honk of a car behind him. He turned to see a sleek, luxurious car pulling up. Confused, he squinted, trying to recognize the driver. To his surprise, it was his old roommate and friend, Samuel. Dressed impeccably, Samuel stepped out, his cologne announcing his presence before his words did. Ken. It's me, Samuel, he said with a proud smile. Samuel? My goodness. It's been ages. Where have you been? Ken exclaimed, his face lighting up with joy and confusion. You cut me off, remember? You thought I was a bad influence, Samuel said, smirking. No, it wasn't like that, Ken stammered, embarrassed. Samuel brushed it off. I heard you're a pastor now. Let's catch up. Hop in, let's grab a bite somewhere fancy, he said, opening the car door. Ken hesitated but got in, curious about Samuel's transformation. As they drove to the eatery, Ken couldn't stop marveling at the luxury surrounding his old friend. Samuel's clothes, his watch, and even the car's interior screamed wealth. At the restaurant, Samuel ordered an extravagant meal. Between bites, he mockingly said, Pastor Ken, how's the church going? Ken sighed deeply. It's fine, but I'm losing members. They want miracles and prophesies, things I can't give. I'm tired, Samuel. I don't know what to do. Samuel laughed loudly. Don't be like your father, Ken. You better do something about it. The world doesn't wait for anyone. Ken frowned. Where have you been all these years? Ah, my brother, I've been out of town, handling things. I just came back recently, Samuel said, waving his hand dismissively. He leaned closer. Ken, I can help you grow your church and make you famous. Call me when you're ready to take your ministry to the next level. He handed Ken a business card and dropped him off. That night, Ken lay in bed, unable to sleep. His mind raced. How had Samuel, the reckless boy of their youth, become so successful? His clothes, his car, and even the way he spent money so effortlessly, everything about him screamed wealth. Ken tried to forget the card, focusing on his ministry, but things only got worse. His congregation dwindled further, and his faith began to falter. His parents noticed his despair and tried to encourage him, but their words couldn't pierce the storm of doubt in his heart. One morning, after another sleepless night, Ken found himself staring at the ceiling. His mind drifted to Samuel's card. Maybe he really could help me. Desperate, he searched for the card and dialed the number. Hello, Samuel? It's Ken. Ken, I've been expecting your call, Samuel said with a sly tone. I need to see you, Ken said, his voice trembling with desperation. Perfect. I'll text you my new address. Come over whenever you're ready, Samuel replied. Ken prepared himself and took a taxi to the address Samuel sent. The mansion that greeted him was beyond anything he had ever seen. The gates alone seemed worth more than his entire church building. Samuel welcomed him warmly. Ken, my brother, this is just one of my many houses. Come in. Ken was in awe as he stepped into the lavish home. Samuel, your wealth is unbelievable. Please, I need your help even if it's a loan to improve my church. I can't keep struggling like this. Samuel chuckled darkly. Ken, money alone won't solve your problem. You need power. Once you have power, the wealth, the miracles, and the prophesies will follow. Your congregation will grow overnight. What kind of power? Ken asked, leaning forward, his curiosity piqued. Samuel smirked. There's a place I can take you. Many popular pastors have been there. All your wishes will be granted. But you must be ready. Ken hesitated for only a moment before saying, Samuel, let's go. I'm tired of being the struggling pastor while others are thriving. Samuel laughed. No going back, Ken. Tomorrow, we'll go. That night, as Ken rested in his room, there was a knock at the door. It was his mother. Ken, my son, I had a terrible dream about you. I couldn't understand it, but please, whatever you're planning, be careful. Pray more, my son. God will make a way for you, she said, her voice heavy with worry. Ken reassured her and went to bed, but her words lingered in his mind. Still, he comforted himself with the thought that his struggles would soon be over.